All right. Okay, I think we're live. Okay, good. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the session. Thanks for coming in for our live sacred space session for this week, our 61st session in this series. As always, I'm honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty, and I look forward to sharing our time together with you in our shared sacred space today. So the things we'll do in our shared sacred space today are, number one, we'll go ahead and set sacred space. And then once we're fully in sacred space, we'll have our overall topic for the week. And our topic for this week will be the power of holding space in transformation. The power of holding space in transformation. Then we'll have a bit of an exercise related to that, and then we'll close sacred space. And so now I will go ahead and start the process of opening sacred space. And to do that, I will start by saying that what our intention is, what we would like to do here, is to create a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control. That's it. It's that simple. And we want to do that in order for us to feel comfortable, to open to higher guidance from within our own selves. However we define that. It could be a muse, intuition, higher guide, just brilliant flashes of insight that come to us when we're in this more relaxed state. A safe sanctuary space for us all to be able to relax and surrender with no feeling of danger or threat, so that we can partake of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do every week, that we all follow the 4 principles of proceeding in sacred space. The first is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now that's the rule that we do when we are meeting in person around the world. But here, because the stream is public, the replay will be public as well. The way we handle confidentiality is via anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous. The way you would do that is to come into the Crowdcast stream from Facebook or wherever else you're watching, and then go into the edit profile, and then change your profile username to Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, whatever you like, and then come back in and continue participating from there. Okay. So the second principle is that we try our best to refrain from giving each other or even ourselves any feeling of threat or controlling, even if it's well-intentioned. So any feeling even of fixing or intervening or tough love, right? Where you say, well, you know, to fix this, you better do this and this. So we refrain from being prescriptive as well, ideally, right? And the reason for that is that in the sacred space, we are holding space for each other to be however we are, right? That release of fear, threat, or control, even well-meaning fear, threat, and control. Because there are certain things, certain kinds of nourishment that you can only get when you're in sacred space. So we come here to try to keep the space as sacred, purely sacred as possible, so we can get our stuff done that we need sacred space to get done. So we allow and hold space for each other to be however we are, to be afraid, to be anxious, to be happy, to be relaxed. And then the meta level above that of how we feel about how we feel. So I'm afraid and I feel guilty. I'm afraid and I feel righteous. I'm happy and I feel great that I'm happy. Or I'm happy and I feel guilty that I'm happy, right? So how we feel and how we feel about how we feel, however you find yourself from moment to moment in sacred space, we hold space for each other to be however we are, without any fear or expectation that someone's going to come in and try and fix you or change you, okay? The third principle, which is a corollary to the first two, is that there is no commerce, right? So nothing may be sold, I can't sell you anything. Gary can't sell you anything. Please refrain from selling things to each other in the chat, in the various streams we're doing. And this also covers recommendations. So kind of harkening back to the point about not intervening or controlling, even with good intention. We don't recommend things here either. So if you've done one of my programs and you're like, oh yeah, I did this program with Artie before and it was great and I'm not compensating you, we still ask to refrain from doing that, recommending me, recommending books, et cetera, et cetera. Not because these are bad or ill-intentioned, but because in sacred space, we're trying to sort of let go of control as much as possible. So we ask that nothing be sold or recommended or suggested, because once again, we are here for your energy, not for the things you bring, right? We're here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. We are here for your essence, not for your value add. And then the fourth principle is no expectation of participation, right? So because we release fear, threat, and control, there's no pressure to do anything, right? You can chat, you can not chat, you can stick around, you can come and go as you please. There's no fear, threat, and control for you to come into sacred space or invite your friends into sacred space. You just do whatever however you don't have to do anything. Again, because the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention when you feel so moved to give it, right? In other words, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. So this is the quick kind of thumbnail of sacred space. And you can do this for yourself, sitting alone in a room, going on a long run, reflecting, letting ideas come to you in meditation, in the shower, right? But when we gather together as a group, all of us together will tend to amplify that effect. And that's one of the beautiful things about coming together in a group in sacred space. So this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with this, that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control for you to come into sacred space and stay here. But we are about to cross the threshold into sacred space. So we want to pause here and give everyone a moment to stay or withdraw from the group. Make your selection as you feel so moved. And if you withdraw from the group, that's totally okay. We'll still catch up with you later in profane space. We'll still hang out. We'll still be friends. No worries at all. No worries at all. Okay. So we'll pause for a moment and give you a bit of space to make your selection. Okay. Okay. All right. So for the rest of us then, we will now move forward into our shared sacred space. And as we cross the threshold together into our shared sacred space for this week, I'll just remind everyone that we would like to hold to the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space: confidentiality/anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no fixing, no interventions, no commerce, no suggestions, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right. Welcome to Sacred Space, everyone. Thank you so much. And let's now move to our topic of the week. So our session topic for this week will be the power of holding space in transformation. So this week, when I did my weekly brainstorm call with Gowrie, my editor in Bangalore, the story she brought to us kind of triggered this brainstorm and deeper reflection and insight around what is the role of higher vision, but in particular, in addition, the power of holding space in the process of transformation. One might say in the mysterious, not completely knowable process of transformation. Okay, and this is what we want to focus on this week. So I think the story Gowrie has selected is from the Native American tradition. So I will invite Gowrie to come on screen if you're there and tell us about the story you have selected for this week. Hi, Gowrie.
See, can you hear me?
Yeah, hear and see you. A-okay.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
All right.
Hi, everyone. Good to be back on Sundays.
Yay, thanks for coming back. All right. Tell us about the story you selected for this week.
Yeah, so I've been, reading, as I do every week, different kinds of stories to see, what clicks. Usually it's a word or it's some kind of a motif that I feel intrigued about, and even if I don't completely understand it, I say, okay, this caught my attention, so let's just go with it. And this time it was this Native American story, and the thing about it's called the Coyote Spirit and the Weaving Woman. And I've heard the motif of the weaving woman, the basket woman in Native American tales quite often in different contexts, and I've read different stories, and I've loved that imagery, right? I've loved that symbol. And when we started LSS, the fairy tale theme, I've always wanted to kind of use that motif and do a story on the weaving woman, but I hadn't found anything that kind of resonated, the way this story did. So I'm quite excited about this one. I'm finally getting to do it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, I'm excited. Would you tell us the story?
Yeah. So, like I said, the story is called The Coyote Spirit and the Weaving Woman. And in the story, there are just 3 characters that come into play. One's the weaving woman, who lived under the stony river bank, which cut through, a country of dunes and hills, right? And then there's the coyote spirit, which is a term which is basically a coyote spirit is a man whose form has changed to kind of fit with his evil behavior, as the story says. And he roams around the dunes and the plains. And he has an entire range that he covers, but always away from, villages where people mostly go about their business. So he keeps away from that. But that's the coyote spirit. And then there's the goat girl, who keeps her flock, again, close to the village and, out in the open plains, sometimes to the foot of the hills, but she makes sure never goes out of sight from the village, right? So these are the 3 characters in the story. So the weaving woman, whose work is primarily, she makes fine baskets of split willow and grass and roots. And she lived alone because the story says there was no one who wished to live with her. And around the village, people whispered among themselves that she was different from other people. And they said that she had an infirmity of the eyes, which caused her to see everything with rainbow fringes, apparently. So she saw everything bigger and brighter and better than it was. So all her days seemed fruitful. Just a handful of pine nuts looked like a feast. And every boy who went hunting with his bow at his back looked like a painted brave. Every old woman, who went digging roots looked like a medicine man. So this was what the weaving woman was about. And all day at her hut, she sat weaving baskets, smiling at whoever passed by. But the people of the village were always wary of her, right? And it was not surprising that, seeing how her, eyesight was and how cheerful and happy she was all the time, that her baskets turned out to be wonderful. And the tribesmen in the villages, they kind of, they loved the baskets. They bought baskets from her. They're quite happy with them, but they always kind of shook their heads and said, her craft is just perfect. She's so good at this, but if only she were more like other people, And it never occurred to them that if she were more like other people, her baskets wouldn't be what they were, right? And meanwhile, the woman didn't care about any of these comments. And she would sit happily at her weaving, or sometimes she would kind of wander far into the desert, into the plains, even up the hills, because she wanted to collect, willow and grass for her baskets. So she would just keep wandering wherever the wilderness took her. And because she had these rainbow fringes to her eyes, she was not afraid of anything. So she would go farther and farther into quiet places where no human was to be seen. And she went into these silent places until one day she met the Coyote spirit. Now, the Coyote spirit was once a man, right? And because he was once a man, he's always thinking about humans, always wishing to be with humans. But because he was also a coyote now, no sooner did he think about humans, he thought of eating them. Right? So as soon as he met the weaving woman on the hills, the first thing he wanted to do was he wanted to eat her up or do some mischief and cause her trouble. But because it was too sudden, he didn't think of something immediately. And he kind of just stared at her, wondering, who this was. And the moment the weaving woman saw the coyote, because of the infirmity of her eyes, she didn't see him as a coyote. She saw him as a man. And she opened her water bottle and gave him some water to drink. And she did it so kindly that he was almost embarrassed. And he was also kind of puzzled because she didn't seem in the least afraid of him, And I mean, what kind of a woman would come so far into the desert and meet this beast and offer drink, right? I mean, she wasn't afraid at all. So the coyote spirit then thought that, I need to kind of find out who this woman is and why she was here. And later he kept thinking about her and thinking about how he would cause her trouble. And he thought, well, this is my range. She shouldn't have come here. And whoever walks into a coyote spirit's range and meets the coyote spirit, should know to face the consequences. And, she is not at all like that goat girl. And the coyote spirit knew about the goat girl because he'd been watching her often from the top of the hill. But the goat girl always made sure that she was out in the open with no lurking places, no hiding places. She was never far from where the corn grew, where the old tribesmen were working. And she always kept in sight of them, right? And every morning she would come out of her hut, she would leave the goats loose, and she'd follow them around. And then as sunset, she would go back into her village. So that was her routine. And the coyote spirit watched her and thought, yeah, I mean, that's how this weaving woman should have been. Why did she come so far into my land? And so one day, as he kept thinking about this, he decided that he would want to walk up straight to the weaving woman's hut. And it so happened that when he did, the weaving woman would look up from her, weaving work, and she would greet him and she would give him, news of the season. She would talk to him about what the tribesmen were saying. And she was just so friendly and not at all surprised or worried about seeing him there, that he started to think less and less about, making mischief for her and more curious. So he kept going back and back. And he thought, oh, there can't be any harm with such familiarity, so why not? And then finally, one day, he was back to thinking that he wanted to do some mischief. He decided that he would ask her to go with him to dig for roots, right at the foot of the hill. And of course, the weaving woman consented. She was happy to go with him. She was a friendly woman. And all this while, the coyote spirit thought of all the mischief that he would do. So as they went, the weaving woman talked to him. She shared with him all kinds of news that she had heard from, the women of the village talk. She talked about how, the feeding grounds of the deer had kind of moved this year, how the quail had mated early this season. She talked about nature and everything. And all of this, the coyote spirit knew, but he wasn't thinking about those things. And finally, they came to a spot which is really still and really quiet. And they had reached a canyon where even birds wouldn't sing. And that was when the weaving woman just went quiet and looked around. And that was the moment when the coyote spirit said, "Do you know why I brought you here?" And the weaving woman said, "Oh, to show me how still and beautiful the world is?" And she wasn't afraid at all. And the coyote said, "To eat you up." And with that, he thought that the woman would fall at his feet and start crying and, for mercy and to leave her. And instead, she laughed. And he was so puzzled. He asked her, "Why do you laugh?" And she said, "How could you eat me? Only wild animals do that." And the coyote said, "What am I then?" "Oh, you're only a man." And he said, "I'm a coyote." The woman said, "Oh, come on. You think I have no eyes? You're a man." And she took him to one of the, rain-fed pools, which had formed out of, eroded rock. So the water was clear as a mirror. And she took the coyote there to see himself on the surface. And when the coyote spirit looked at his own image, he was frightened, so frightened that he ran away as fast as he could, as far as he could. And he ran for 3 whole days before he decided, he left the woman behind. She dug up her own roots herself, and then she went back home. And after 3 days, the coyote spirit came back to her hut. And he kind of peeked in and said, "Tell me, now, am I a coyote or a man?" "Oh, a man," she said. And then he went off again. He ran away for a day or two, and then he came back and said, "And now?" She said, "Oh, a man. And I think you're growing more and more handsome every day." And this was kind of true, because the more she insisted that he was a man, and the more he kept thinking about it, the animal had started to go out of him, and the man started to come back. And one of the nights, he went down to the village to try and steal a goat kid. And then it occurred to him, just in time, that a man wouldn't do that. Right? So he gave up and went back to the hills. He dug up roots and picked berries and ate them. And that was the true sign that he'd grown back into a man again. But then he would also keep going back to the weaving woman. And once she asked him to, stop at her hut and eat with her. And there was a delicious smell coming from the cooking pots. And so he accepted. And he lay in a blanket that she'd put out for him. And he ate the meal that she served him. And it was all so comfortable he kind of lied down. And at that moment, somehow, he thought of the goat girl. And he said, that is the right kind of girl. She's always stayed in the safe, open places. She's always gone home early. I mean, she would know what the world is like, right? So she would be able to tell me what I am. And all these days, this man who used to be a coyote, he had begun to kind of walk with men a little, and he'd heard about the weaving woman's eyesight, the infirmity of the eyes. So he'd started to get doubts about what she said about him. So next day, he went out into the place where, the goat girl would leave her flock. And he went close to her. But, she didn't seem afraid of him. And he didn't speak. He went back. 3 days he did this. And third day, he approached her and said, "Tell me, what do I seem to you?" And she said, "You seem like a very handsome man." And then he said, "Then will you marry me?" And the goat girl said, "Yes." So now, when the man and the goat girl had been married for a while, now it had been a month, and he built a hut for her, and it took her to that hut. It was fashioned exactly like the kind of hut that her tribe's people had in the village. But he built it at the foot of the hill where he used to roam around. So he had that hut now. And they were married for a month. And he was quite comfortable in this life. He wasn't afraid of anything except that his wife might find out that he had once been a coyote. So during the first month, he asked her, "Do you know this basket maker who lives, near the riverbank? They call her the weaving woman." And his wife said, "Yeah, I've heard something of her. I've bought her baskets a few times. Why do you ask?" And the man said, Oh, it's nothing. I've just, heard strange stories about her that she kind of associates with coyote spirits and creatures like that, because he wanted to find out what his wife would think about that. And the wife then firmly said, "Well, if that's the case, the less we see of her, the better. You can't be careful with these things." And after that, this man who'd been a coyote and his wife, every time they visited the village, they would avoid the riverbank, they would avoid the place where the weaving woman's hut was, and they would kind of take another trail to go roundabout so that they could avoid her. But the weaving woman herself never noticed it. So that's the story. Artie, would you like to come back up?
Yes. One second.
I can you, but oh yeah, there you are.
Here we are. Thank you for that story.
Thank you.
I love it even more the second time around.
Yeah.
So I'd like to start where I usually start, which is to ask you the question, where do you enter into that story?
So, the first thing that really caught my attention, like I said, I've tried to find different stories of the weaving woman, but in this one, the thing that caught my attention is the mention of the eyes. And it didn't come to me at first where I'd kind of seen that before. But it wasn't slightly different context, but the feeling was there. So we did the story of the goose girl in the session on the wise woman archetype. I think this was nearly a year ago. I'll try and put that link up. So when we discussed the wise woman, we took this European fairy tale of the wise woman and of the goose girl and the crone who gave her shelter and again, kind of facilitated a kind of transformation of the princess. So in that particular story, there's this point that the story makes right at the beginning, that this old lady lived on top of a hill, went to pick fruit and berries every day, but everybody would keep away from her, and fathers would warn their sons never to meet her in the eyes.
To look her in the eyes. Right, right. I remember this.
To look her in the eyes, right? So that is one warning that young boys were given, not to look her in the eyes. So, and there's this general feeling of something is wrong with her, and if you look her in the eyes, you're going to be in trouble.
Or you'll get infected with her vision.
So that's what I was reminded of right at the end. I mean, in this story, it comes in two places. In the beginning, where the tribesmen are always commenting about the infirmity of her eyes, and no one wants to live with her or live close to her. And right at the end, where they decide to kind of avoid her because you can't be too careful. So that's really what caught my attention in the story.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this story because, like with a lot of these stories, there's a crone again, and we've seen the crone in multiple places in this whole series, even from a year ago.
Yeah.
But each time, we circumambulate back to the crone, there's a different part that comes out, right? So here we see the issue with vision.
Right.
But then it deepens a little because it's like this rainbow vision. So I guess what I'm saying is when dreams happen and you have a series of dreams over months or years even, an old figure that you see, you kind of see the parallel in the latest dream. So you know that it's like the same. But then this version like blows out the detail a little bit more. So you learn a little bit more about the overall archetype. And for me, it's fascinating because I think that's kind of what is really going on for me in this story, right? Because like the main thing here that's very interesting is that there's two key inner feminines in the story, different aspects of the one inner feminine. And then just to take a step back, right, I'll say how we read things mythopoetically, when we do dreams in our healing work with advisees, when we read fairy tales, myths, even when we read like, things that happened in the regular real world, and you can read them mythopoetically as well. The way we read something mythopoetically is very simple. It's basically to regard every major actor in the story, objects count as well, as being a symbol of a different part of your own inner self. Right? So the goat girl is an aspect of you, the crone is an aspect of you, the coyote man is definitely an aspect of you. And then you start at the beginning, you press play, you let the video kind of unspool and sort of happen. And then you regard them all as like different aspects of your inner self. And you look for who's doing what to whom and what's happening, what's getting from point A to point B, what is transforming from beginning to end. And you kind of get different kinds of messages and insights from watching the physics of the action happen. Okay. And in past sessions, I've explained in detail what I mean when we say inner masculine and inner feminine, where these are two kind of distinct but interweaving aspects of every human being, regardless of your outer gender, right? So as a man, I have an inner feminine and an inner masculine, and they each have bias toward different functions where they kind of take care of different aspects of running the ship of your life. So here there are two different inner feminines, two different aspects of your single inner feminine, and they both have a difference in the way that they see. Their vision works differently, right? The crone, the weaving woman, obviously has a very special kind of vision, this rainbow fringed vision. But the goat girl also has her own kind of vision, which is a very practical and very grounding vision, right? She can see whether you're a man and see whether you're kind of a handsome man by like sort of the the standards of the village, right? And she can decide and be a doorway, a portal by which you can rejoin society, right? And both the crone and the goat girl both hold space in their own way, and we'll kind of get to that in a moment. But the first thing I want to do is I want to focus on the crone a little bit, the weaving woman. So the symbol, there's a particular symbolism around the act of weaving. Weaving, when you weave something, it is a narrative storytelling function, right? You're a spinner of yarns. You're a weaver of tall tales, right? So this act of weaving is an act of storytelling and an act of narrative making, right? And the hidden, kind of not so hidden power of narrative making is that if you are the one creating and spinning the narrative, you are the one creating reality, right? When a little child kind of is afraid of the dark or is afraid to go to their first day of school, right? As the parent, you can weave a narrative that amplifies the terror. Or you can weave a narrative, right, that says, well, you know, think of all these like kids you haven't met yet. They're going to be like really good friends. And don't you want to meet your future best friends, right? So as the parent, you make their world, not just through giving them food and shelter and security, but you make their world through giving them narrative, right? And of course, one of the ways intergenerational wounds transfer is that if the parent is giving a bad narrative or a harmful, a wounding narrative, oh, you're terrible, or nobody's going to like you. Who would like you, right? Because you're not the right body shape, or you're not popular enough, et cetera, et cetera. That is a reflection of a wound in the parent. And of course, the parent gets that narrative from their parents, right? These things kind of roll down through the generations. But regardless, for wounding or healing or transformation, narrative is incredibly powerful, okay? And so she is a weaver, but she's also a weaver of baskets, right? And baskets, especially in kind of indigenous traditional culture, baskets are the main, baskets may be pots in a different kind of tradition, but baskets are the primary way you transport and store things. Said another way, baskets hold space. Baskets hold space. So the crone uses her powers of weaving to create the derivative power of holding space. Her narrative holds space. And holding space is transformative. The cooking pot where you go in to pressure and containment and transformation, everything we've been talking about during the pandemic, is a space holding function. So the crone, you can read in this way, holds space for the coyote spirit. The goat girl, once he is transformed to a certain point, then marries him and then holds space for his regular world aspect, right? So the crone is the transformative inner feminine. And then the goat girl is this sort of almost like post-transformation, then reintroducing him into the regular world. So the crone in particular is a kind of shamanic witch figure here, obviously, right? She is a kind of midwife who holds this womb for the coyote and then transforms him and heals him and brings him back, really preparing him for this other aspect of her, because there's only one inner feminine, right? So the crone aspect takes you, holds space for you, prepares you for the goat girl aspect, which then holds space for you and then takes you back into society. And these shamanic figures are the ones, and we've seen this in multiple instances, like the crone from a couple weeks back in the Malaysian flower story, right? She has a special kind of vision too. She can see the fairy princess where others can't. Shamanic figures typically live on the edge of the village, as the crone in the flower story did, as this crone lives on the edge of the village, down by the river where nobody else wants to be with her. For those of you who watched, I think almost a year ago again, the session on the artist archetype, where we talk about the artist as a joint worker, right? Where they are right on the boundary between two realms. And the word artist has that root R, right? Which from Indo-European kind of language roots means the joint, right? My articulated fingers. When I say I'm very articulate, right? I can basically move and swing my words into very precise meanings and ways. So I'm a very articulate speaker. The articles in punctuation and grammar, right, are the and, or, but, right? And or but. These are the articles of language. And these are the hinges on which things swing. I can say, I think you're awesome, but you have a very minor flaw. And because of this minor flaw, I'm not going to hire you. Right? So these are the things on which words and narrative swings around in circumambulatory ways or forward. But these articles give you power. So the shamanic figures are a form of artist. All artists are kind of like visionary shamans, right? They live at the edge of the village, at the joint, at the threshold between two realms, the formed known realm of structure of the village, and then the formless wild realm of the forest beyond the village, the edge of forest and village. And in her vision, she is able to see across realms, right? With her rainbow vision, right, which the village, the conservative structured world, which is fine, sees as an infirmity, as a defect, right? This is actually at the edge of the village, a superpower, because she sees things not as they are in the profane, but as they are in the sacred. And why do we say the sacred? Well, we say, what is the sacred? It is the space devoid of fear, threat, and control. So she sees the Coyote man in his true essence as a man, even though he has banished himself to the realm of animals. And she sees him in this state devoid of fear, threat, or control, even when he's like, I'm going to eat you. And she's like, whatever, come on. You know, people don't eat people. That's gross. And he's like, no, I'm really going to eat you because I'm a coyote. And she's like, come on, right? And completely, it's the power of her vision and narrative, right? That doesn't even see the threat. And in this special kind of seeing makes the threat no longer exist. Because the one who is threatening is like, oh, am I a man? Right? Am I a man? And while he's going back and forth in his circumambulation, running away, coming back, running away, coming back, she holds space for him. She is always there, ready to answer his questions. Okay, that's the power of a shaman. So on this vision part, mythopoetically, it's obvious, but the eyes, when you see them in dreams and fairy tales, are a symbol of vision. Mythopoetically, blindness can be a symbol of a loss of vision. But typically, blindness, physical blindness, is a symbol of a different kind of vision opening, right? Poets are often described as blind, right? Great soothsayers are described as blind, like the blind poet bards of Greek tradition. Odin, the Norse trickster god, in the Teutonic German system, Wotan, right? He's a wanderer, he's a trickster, but he's also known for having only one eye. He has an eye patch. And the reason is he gave up one eye in order to drink from like the sacred chalice, to have the full knowledge of everything past, present, and future, right? So to gain this higher vision, you give up some aspect of your regular profane vision. And it's not necessarily like a physical blinding, but in order to see the more visionary other realm, like below or above, you have to be able to see beyond the actual form, right? When you see a flower, instead of saying, oh, I can cut that flower and sell it for so-and-so in the market, you look at the flower and, you know, in a more kind of state of, let's say, aesthetic arrest, right? The flower becomes the entire universe, right? And that is a different kind of seeing. It's a different kind of vision. Odysseus in the Odyssey is directed by Circe to go to the underworld to meet Tiresias, who is a blind prophet. And so we have this theme, just like the Coyote man going to the Weaver woman, the Weaver crone, where when you're going into transformation, and here Odysseus is trying to get home. He's trying to go through his initiation across the Mediterranean back to his proper wife, Penelope. And he has to go into the underworld, right? So caterpillar going down into the cocoon in order to come back up. Odysseus himself has to go into the underworld to meet Tiresias, who is the only one in the entire pantheon, right, of the Greek world, who can tell him how to get home. So when you go down into the transformation world, you go consult someone who has a special vision. So who is Tiresias? And I want to tell a little bit more about Tiresias to get you back into the sort of the flavor of what this crone weaver is figure. And it's important to note this because, again, when we read this mythopoetically, we all have a Tiresias within us. We all have a basket weaver woman with a different kind of vision within us. Okay. And it's a very powerful thing to get to know and get a little bit familiar with the physics of what this part of you is like. Okay. So in the Greek tradition, Tiresias was a man, right, who one day was walking through the forest with his walking staff and came across the situation of two snakes copulating, right, mating, a male snake and a female snake. And he took his staff and he placed it in between the snakes. And instantly Tiresias was transformed into a woman. Okay. And then he lived as a woman for about 8 years. And then 8 years later, she was again walking through the forest with her walking staff. And again, found another two snakes mating. And moved by instinct, she put her walking staff in between the two snakes again and instantly turned back into a man. Right. So in the dark forest, the unexplored places of the self, she experiences the crossing of boundaries from one gender into another. Now, one day after this happened, Zeus and Hera, right, up above in Mount Olympus, were having a debate. And the debate was over which gender experienced more pleasure during lovemaking. Okay. And Zeus held that women definitely had more pleasure during lovemaking. And Hera said, no, absolutely not. Hera's like, the matron, the proper matron. It was obviously the man who has more pleasure during lovemaking. And Zeus says, this is interesting. Well, how do we decide this debate? Let's call Tiresias, because he has actually been both a man and a woman. And it's a fascinating thing, because Tiresias is then this example of a mortal who has experienced things that even the gods have not, right? Such that even the gods consult him. And this is a part of you. So Tiresias shows up as summoned, and Zeus asks him the question, who has more pleasure? And without missing a beat, he says, oh, absolutely, the woman has way more pleasure. Hera, right, sitting there, was outraged, right, at this reply, and immediately struck him blind. Right? And he didn't even do anything wrong. He just answered the question that Zeus asked him. How are you going to say no to Zeus, right? And then she stormed out of the room. Zeus afterward then felt bad for Tiresias, but he can't undo, right, the punishment of Hera. So he compensates his physical blindness by granting him the power of prophecy. Okay. So he loses his regular vision, and then Zeus grants him in compensation a higher vision, the power of prophecy. So in tradition after tradition, these two symbols, special vision and then physical blindness, go together. There is a part of you that is blind to the physical world, right? there's a part of you that is not distracted by the details of the physical world, the news cycle, bills, the prices in the market, the stock market going up and down, right? What's being chatted about on social media, right? And when you're doing that, you're only in your head, you're not in your body, right? Social media is obviously completely disembodied because you're just like staring at your phone. And if you're distracted by that physical world, drawn in by it, you will not be able to see in this other dimension. You will not be able to activate your rainbow vision, right? To see the beauty all around us. The endless feast that is before you now, right? Even right now, the feast is all around you. And as Christ said, right, the feast is all around you, basically, if you have eyes to see, right? And if you have ears to hear. And instead, in fact, speaking of that, at the end of the Thomas Gospel, right, Jesus says it explicitly. And I think the quote is something like, "The kingdom of heaven is spread upon the earth, not above, on the earth, and people do not see it." The eternal feast is always with you now. And I mean that in the physical, seeable sense. Okay. But you have to be able to look with a certain kind of seeing. Okay. So anyway, so you get a sense for Tiresias' power, right? So like, okay, so he has power of prophecy, big deal. Well, in the Odyssey, Odysseus goes through this whole rigmarole of going down into the underworld, crying, his men crying, because it's like, oh my gosh, why do we have to go into the underworld? Well, we're living beings. Are we going to not come back? They're terrified. But they have to go anyway, because Tiresias is the only one who has enough power of seeing to tell him what he needs to do to get back. Now, this crone in this story has the exact same capability. What everyone in the normal world calls an infirmity, an illness, a sickness, a defect. And yet she can see perfectly everything with advantages. She has a sacred vision, which the profane values not at all. Right? She looks at a coyote and she sees him physically, devoid of fear, threat, and control. Even when he has her trapped in the middle of nowhere, she laughs at him when he says he wants to eat her. He's like, "Amy, come on, get real." Right? It's not a ruse. It is what she actually sees. And now you can say from the point of view of the village, from the point of view of the profane, that she's a fool, right? She doesn't see the real world. We don't want to hang out with her. She's like, you don't want to start if you hang out with her too much, you'll get kooky too, right? You'll be infected with her vision, and then you'll start seeing rainbows and unicorns everywhere too. So we fear her because she's right on the edge, and if you get too close to her, you might tip over to the other side. So she sees him in his sacred state, and she's a basket weaver. She holds space for him. The power of her vision is what transforms him, right? With her narrative, and it's a very simple narrative. It's like, well, you're just a man. In fact, I think you're getting handsomer day by day as you keep coming back around. I don't know why you keep coming back around asking the same question, but you're getting handsomer, I think. Right? She weaves this rainbow basket around him, and she holds him in that space as being seen as he truly is. And the seeing and holding space for him is the thing that transforms him. In this sense, she becomes a kind of mentor figure to him. Right? What does a mentor do? A good mentor does exactly the same thing. Right? You're a young person. Your parents call you useless, lazy, good for nothing, blah, blah, blah. But an uncle or a teacher sees you with different eyes, right? Sees that place within you, that power within you that you yourself don't even see. It's like, I'm not a coyote. I'm just whatever. I'm not a man. I'm a coyote, right? I'm just a good for nothing, lazy coyote. But they continue to see you. And they describe this thing they see in you back to you. Okay. And then after a while, when they hold this space consistently, right, you start to realize, if you allow yourself to be held by them, you realize that what they are describing is the real you. Now, this takes a long time to calibrate to this version of you. But at least if the mentor gets to you soon enough, you see that it is true. This reminds me of a story I heard about Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan, when he was young, about 18 or 19, he attended the University of Minnesota for a year, right? And when he was there, a friend of him played him an album of Woody Guthrie's songs, right? And in one of his memoirs, Bob Dylan said that, my friend played me this album, and eventually I kind of like stole the album. I borrowed it and never gave it back, right? Because I just listened to that album over and over and over again until I can play every song by memory and sing it exactly like Woody Guthrie. And he said, and this is the interesting part, when I heard those songs, I felt more like myself than I ever have. When I heard those songs, I felt more like myself than I ever have. Which is so interesting, because Bob Dylan, anyone, is his own person, his own unique idiosyncrasies, his own vision, and yet he felt like himself when he heard and played those songs. Mentorship flows through the generation. It can flow through a person's work like this, right? Even someone listening to this talk, right, 300 years from now, right, may feel like more like yourself than you ever have, because you come from the same kind of ancestral mythopoetic tree that I come from, right? I mean, that I am a branch of, right? There are teachers whose books I read, and they've been dead for generations, but I read them, and it's like I don't just read the words, I feel where it's coming from, and I can like complete the sentences as they're writing, because I'm tapped into the same flow, right? In terms of tradition. It can flow, so this mentorship power can flow through their work exactly like this. It doesn't have to be a physical mentorship. Something in the mentor, expressed and articulated, resonates and reflects in you through the reflection of the eyes and the seeing of the mentor. And an album, a book, a talk, right, a video is a kind of holding space, right? And this vision then, this thing from the mentor bestows vision and tremendous healing, right? So the weaving woman sees the Coyote man with her vision, spins this narrative, which is really just bearing not false witness, bearing true witness to what she sees. She just has special vision, right? Of what his true self was, and restored this and healed him. Right? And this is exactly why, I teach healing and bliss together, right? Because vision, bliss, and healing all go hand in hand, right? The bliss and healing are basically two dimensions of a single motion of like turning within and finding the light within yourself, right? Healing does this, and then bliss, when you find your bliss, it sort of pulls this forward into the world as well. Now, the gorgeous thing about the weaving woman is that she has vision across the realms and across dimensions, and holds space for what she sees. She sees the Coyote as a man and holds space for him as a man, even when he is unable to hold space for himself as a man. He's like, I'm just a coyote. I'm just like horrible. I'm karma. There's no hope for me. I'm paying for my past karma. And she says, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just looking at you, and I'm telling you what I see. You can run away if you want. Come back, ask me again. And I'm not being, I'll look again, and I'll tell you what I see. Right? And that's the container he goes into to restore his vision and to heal. And that's why the shaman is a healer. That's why the artist is a healer. That's why the trickster is a healer. And that's why, I end up doing all this like spiritual mythopoetic stuff, and also bliss, and also healing, right? When people come into my weekly live group advising session, right, and we do Q&A and we read dreams, I never tell anyone what to do, right? I simply tell them what I see, right? My code words are, I'm just brainstorming. I'm just going to give you my wild ass intuition. I don't know what you should do with your life. You give me a dream, I'll read the dream for you. And then you decide how it applies to your life, right? And I always say, if we disagree on any points, you are always correct. I don't know anything about you, right? I typically don't know the advisee's job, what car they drive. I don't know anything about their lives. If they're divorcing, getting through a bad relationship, I don't know what they did. I don't know what the other person did. I'm not here to judge or be a referee, but they will have dreams, they will have reflections, and I'll read the dreams as mythopoetic artifacts and hand them back. I read their dream and I just tell them what I see, right? And I'm not interested in anything else. I don't want to know about your everyday life's details because there's nothing I can do to add sort of, to my insight. Your everyday details don't help me read the dream. I'm just reading the dream. And then you may be like, oh my gosh, that's mind-blowing. That maps completely to what's happening. And it's like, well, I don't even know what's happening. I'm just giving you the dream. And so this vision and holding space is what transforms the Coyote man. The larger point here is that the inner feminine, this crone aspect of the inner feminine, holds space for the inner masculine. The inner feminine is the one that has the piercing vision that transforms this frog, this monster, right, of the inner masculine. And there are many fairy tales from multiple traditions that describe this dynamic, right? There's a Norwegian tale called the Lindworm, right? Lindwrm. It's something I've always wanted to do in the live group advising kind of context. And it's just one of the best examples of the inner feminine taking control and like transforming the vilified, kind of degraded inner masculine. In the Malaysian flower story, right? The princess, there's two aspects of the inner feminine. There's the fairy princess and the crone, and they hold space for each other, right? And there it's more about bonding, right? And with this bonding, they set in motion a seasonal rhythm of the world, right? So when it's inner feminine and inner feminine getting together, they sort of transform each other, you could say, but they more fuse together and create this rhythmic sort of generative, fertile motion of the world, right? In the Malaysian princess flower story, the princess and the crone come to become like good friends, right? And then every month on the full moon, more of these flowers come, and it explains this rhythm of the natural world in Malaysia, right? In the Demeter Persephone story, right, we focus more on Demeter and Hades, but between Demeter and Persephone and Hades, but between Demeter and Persephone, when they come back into reconciliation, right, they're patterned together, ascribes and describes the pattern of the seasons, of the 4 seasons in our world, right, from winter back to spring, summer, fall, and then back into winter. Now, when it's inner feminine, inner masculine, often the masculine comes to the shelter, the womb, the woven basket of the inner feminine for space and nourishment, and within that he is transformed. Now, in male initiation, it's the elder males who hold space. And this is also one of the containers of transformation. My point is there are many different ways this can happen. It's not a formula, and they can all coexist for different situations, right? But this pattern of the inner feminine crone holding space for the inner masculine is definitely one of the patterns. And so the point here is that these figures, these shamans at the edge of town, they hold space, they see you for what you are, but you need time to catch up to the reality of who you are, right? So it's not just vision that instantly transforms, it's vision, and then you run away horrified. And then they hold sacred, safe space for you to come back again and again, as many times as you need until you're ready. That's one of the reasons in live group advising and life sacred space and the programs, I'm like, you come and go as you please, right? If you're scared, run away. when you're ready, come back. We'll be here. I mean, hopefully, God willing, even after I die, the videos will be available, right? Even in modern culture, right? Movies. In Star Wars, Obi-Wan sees Luke for who he is, right? And it takes Luke several rounds to get to that point. Morpheus in The Matrix sees Neo for who he really is and holds space for him and gives him time to catch up, right? It's not just vision, but it is the held space, which is the thing that transforms. What's another example? I mean, in therapy, psychotherapeutic therapy, right? It's similarly a combination of vision and holding space, right? Therapy is not advising, right? Therapy is a container. And there's a difference, right? In advising, you discern a pattern. It's a little bit more directive, prescriptive. You bring me a dream, I see the pattern, right? I don't tell you what to do, right? And you can disagree with me, and that's okay. You're always right, right? The quality of sacred space in therapy versus advising is just a little bit different. Anyway, the point here is that all these fairy tale characters are different parts of your own inner self. The crone is a symbol of a shamanic, guiding, space-holding inner feminine within you. Right? You have this crone within you. You have an Obi-Wan. You have a Morpheus within you. Right? Not just that is ready to mentor a young person in the outer world, but to mentor emerging parts of your own inner self. Right? In the wellness community, when they're like, oh, be good to yourself, self-love, self-care. Yeah, so that's good. That's definitely good. For no good reason, it's fine to do. But if it were for a reason, what would it be? It would be to hold space for the emerging parts of you, to heal and then transform into that next stage of growth, right? The target of the inner mentor is the inner part of you that is asking for transformation, right? So there's an Obi-Wan and a Morpheus within you. And in exactly the same way, there is also a Luke and a Neo within you. There's a weaving shaman crone within you, and then there is a coyote man within you as well. At different times, you meet different people, and they reflect different parts of you. The outer world reflects the inner. And so stories like this help you become aware of the different parts of you that are getting perhaps activated, right, by the different people you meet. And then you are reminded of these parts within you as well. Okay, so those are the notes I had. And Gary, do you want to come back up and kick the ball around? Hi.
Hi, Artie. Yeah, I mean, as you were talking about this, it was reminded so much of the Goose Girl story. So I really want to kind of go back to that. In the sense that, you know, even in the similarity between the Goose Girl story and the story is, if you notice, there is the union of the inner masculine and inner feminine, an aspect of it, at the end of the story, which in the Goose Girl story, there is a more willful, intentional kind of a prodding that the crone does, to push the inner masculine into sort of uniting with the inner feminine, right? So that she tells the young man directly and indirectly that, you know, he needs to pay attention to the Goose Girl. There's something in there for him. And eventually, you know, they fall in love. And in this story, it is in the weaving woman's hut, after he's eaten a meal that is served by her, while he's lying down on the blanket that she's put out for him. That's what he thinks of the goat girl, and he thinks of approaching her. Right? So it comes in that kind of a sequence where it's really interesting to me, while she's also holding space for this transformation, it seems like at the end of the transformation, there is that inevitable union of a part of the masculine and feminine that were not united before, that they come together. Just like I mean, it seems so mechanical. It's almost like she's not a part of it, but without her, it wouldn't have happened, right?
Right, right.
So
Well, I
it's
mean,
just
if you
amazing.
view her as an aspect of the inner feminine, it's like the inner feminine is preparing the inner masculine
Yeah,
to get him,
to
kind of up to snuff.
yeah, which is kind of fascinating to me. Is that, I mean, if you regard the crone figure as your higher vision, right? Your inner vision, the faculty that gives you this direction and takes you along the bliss path. And when you're kind of unraveling your own bliss lines, right? Finding out what it is that is blissful to you, what it is that you desire the most. When you're unraveling all of this, and you're also consulting your higher vision faculty, something that happens inevitably along the way is you rediscover lost parts of you. Right. And in my journey, particularly, it was, I mean, the first thing that I stumbled across was the lost inner masculine part, right? The executive function part, the authority, the one that enforces boundaries, the one that goes and gets things done. It is this masculine part that I discovered was exiled, was not to be seen, and was somewhere roaming around the wilderness and in the hills, not part of the village.
Trouble.
Yeah, and making trouble, making mischief. And then once you go through the entire process of this inner vision faculty is holding space, waiting for the transformation to happen, and then finally the vision and the nourishment part kind of comes together with the masculine part, with its boundaries and implementation, right? Manifestation, as we call it. It's so interesting to me because that is the presiding power that enables all of this to happen. It's the crone function, it's the vision function. So to see that in the container of a folktale, kind of explained, described in that way, is just so lovely to be able to kind of discern that from personal experience and then look at it in a folktale and see, oh yeah, that happens.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing I'm struck by in the Goose Girl story and in this one as well is the detail of the fear of the hell space.
Yes.
Where in this story, he's like, no, I'm a coyote. I'm a good for nothing. I'm going to eat you. Why aren't you scared? And she's like, no, you're a man. And he's like, and he's like, okay, let's go to the pond and look in the reflection. And she's like, all right, come on, let's go. And the fascinating thing here is he looks, and the story I don't think exactly says what he sees, but he looks and he's terrified and he runs off for 3 days.
Right.
A little bit like, Christ going down for 3 days, Jonah being 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, and how, every month the moon goes dark for 3 days, right? In new moon phase. Yeah. So he goes down for 3 days and comes back up, and he comes back to check again. What do you see now? It's like, a man. Runs away again. What do you see now? A man. And I think there's a part of this that is very precise and yet delicate and very moving, which is this process is genuinely terrifying.
Yeah.
Right? It's easier to think I'm a good for nothing coyote and everybody hates me and I'll just stay out here on the edge. It's easier to think, oh, there's nothing special in these other realms. It's not spiritual. There's no grief. If you get a little down, just take a pill and get back on the horse. Don't get too fancy either. Stay right here on the straight and narrow. The world's just regular. Let's just, keep farming, keep doing whatever we're doing, and keep to the straight and narrow. Stay in the village, right? Don't go beyond the pale. Don't be too ambitious. The ambit is like the limit of the village, and beyond the ambit is the dark forest, the unexplored forest, right? And to be ambitious is to go right up to the edge of the ambit and perhaps go beyond.
Right.
Which is where the word ambitious comes from. Even in Chinese, right? There's this village forest kind of dichotomy where it shocked me the first time I learned this, but the word for ambition in Chinese is 野心. 野心. Xing is heart, right? So your mind, your heart. And ye means wild. So to be ambitious means you have a wild heart, like it's just going to roam all over the place and go beyond. And a non-wild, civilized heart is not ambitious, right? By definition of the language.
Right.
So people always ask, like, why is healing so nonlinear? Why is it circumambulatory? Why does it take so long, right? Yeah. And the answer is because when you get close to who you really are and what's really going on underneath all that, it's terrifying and you run away.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's like when you run, I'm not shaming you. I'm not preparing you to say, no, you've got to stay here and brute force through it. It's like, no, it will be terrifying. And you will run away. And that's normal. And that's why it's circumambulatory. And that's why it takes so long. Because the getting terrified and running away is a part of the natural process. And you can try to grip and clench and force your way through it, but I don't know, just let the thing just let the flower bloom however it blooms. You don't need to pick the petals apart with your fingers. You're just gonna like ruin it.
And it's interesting, the fear aspect that you brought up is also how in folktales and in a lot of fairy tales, the crone herself is painted as this fearsome figure, right?
Totally.
I mean, if you take the European tradition, Eastern European Baba Yaga, and I mean, she's terrifying even before we know who she is, right? And that is the aspect that I loved about the story, is that the weaving woman is just so lovely, right? She is so friendly and kind and fearless, and you're like, what is so scary about her? And yet there is this coyote who runs away from her all the time. And even in the Malaysian story that we did a couple of weeks ago, the Malaysian flowers, the Nenek Kebayan, the grandmother, right? So it is one of those rare stories where she comes across as this kindly, nurturing figure. But in sort of popular Malaysian folklore, Nenek Kebayan is always seen as this scary spirit figure, right? Where kids are warned about the nenek, and so you just kind of be careful. And but nenek simply means in the Malay language, it simply means grandmother. Like, why would you be terrified of your grandmother? Like, why is that a scary thing? So I think a lot of that fear is ascribed to the crone figure herself, because I think what we really fear, as you said, is the whole process of discovering ourselves and finding out how things are, who I am. And we kind of unconsciously attribute that to meeting the crone. So we're already saying, no, avoid her. We don't want to meet her again, right? Ever. We can help it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the coyote can eat you, right? And what the crone can do is somehow even more scary. He runs from her. So what is so scary? It's like, to see you with a vision of what you truly are, not what you think you should be.
Yeah.
Right. And a vision that is so piercing, it is transformative.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why in the goose story, if you look her in the eye for too long, she will transform you.
Yeah.
Because you will start to see what she sees. And that may or may not be okay with the rest of the village.
Right.
Right. Because she doesn't care. She's on the edge. She sees you as informed by what's in the beyond. And the whole point of the village is to like shield against the beyond and push it back. Right. So there is always this tension between village and forest.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the Hindu tradition, right, there's that phase of life where you literally leave the village and go wandering into the forest. And it's recognized as a valid phase of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were you going to say?
I'm also reminded because of this whole aspect of the scary grandmother versus this loving grandmother, right? I mean, if we really meet the crone and talk to her, we realize she's actually very loving and holds space for us, and she sees us for what we are. And this is the inner feminine aspect of us that we're talking about, the inner grandmother, right? And that reminded me of something you say in healing all the time, in live group advising in your healing program, is that self-love, when you're talking about self-love, one is that it's always there. It's not something you have to cook up or rediscover or, make up as you go. It's always there. And you also kind of advise on sort of talking to that aspect of you, like the grandmother, right? You want to consult the inner grandmother. I mean, I don't know how much of it, but it all kind of comes together at this point. And I'm saying, oh yeah, I mean, I would imagine that inner grandmother would to be someone like the weaving woman, right? Who'd be so kind, and lovely, and talk to you and see you exactly for who you are. And that's the whole point. I mean, that's basically the definition of self-love. Right, just seeing ourselves as who we are, and holding space for ourselves, and there's no shaming, there's no finger wagging, and there's no, oh, I should have done this, or I should be doing this.
That's fascinating, because that inner granny motif we talk about in 7-Day Healing is like, it's the one that actually feeds your bad habits, because you're soothing and shielding. You need to eat for the chemical comfort. You need to drink for the chemical comfort of, and one of the things the inner granny does is like, she's trying to ply you with these things because she doesn't want you to be in pain.
Yeah.
So it's almost like she sees the coyote overeating, over drinking, over soothing part of you, and almost like holds space for that as well.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying too.
Yeah.
Because it's like, when you're rooted in the village and you transform and grow in ways that no longer fit you in the village, you either get stuck there and die, basically, and wither away. Or, like we say in the 3 realms, you like jump across realms. Or you go into the upper spiritual realm, you go into the grief realm. And a crone like this, a mentor like this, is someone who is going to both guide you and midwife you through the different realms to get around the obstacle and continue moving forward. Yeah. I hadn't thought about it like that, but that's right. Yeah.
So do you have a reflection question or an exercise?
Exercise, yes. Okay, let's do the exercise. So the exercise we thought of was to then, and the way you would do this exercise, again, the 4th principle of proceeding sacred space, no expectation of participation. This is just only if you want, But if you wanted to do this, you would find 10 minutes of alone time this week, either sitting in your car or alone at home, wherever you are, to have some like peace and quiet for about 10 minutes with some pen and paper. And the exercise for this week would be to hold in your mind, if you can, this crone aspect of you. Okay. Now we've been at this for like 61 sessions, so I'm pushing you a little bit to see this crone aspect of the story and to see it as a part of you, the part of you who has this rainbow vision, who sees things. I mean, the story says better than they are. I would say, well, better than they are in the profane, but actually as they are in the sacred. right? So to me, from the crone's view, her vision isn't special rainbow. Her vision is normal. It's just normal in the sacred. Right? So I would characterize crone vision as seeing things as they are. Not better, but just as they are. Right? And when I'm advising people, I get this pushback from certain kinds of advisees all the time. They say, well, Artie, you're always framing things more positively. You're always trying to give me the pep talk and make things seem better than they actually are. And then, then I get into my like little lawyer mode, right? And I rebut them and I say, well, no, this is not, I'm not trying to sort of make you aspire to this next level. I'm just telling you what I see, right? I'm not saying it's better than worse than what you see, but I'm going to tell you what I see. And in good faith, I'm not going to lie to you, right? And then once I tell you what I see, I then don't wag my finger at you and say, get off your ass and see it like I see it, or do this and make your life all sort of consistent with this higher vision that I see, right? So it's not something I'm telling you to do. I'm not saying this is the way you should be. When I see you in this mode, I'm just telling you what I see. And then if I'm doing a good job, I hold space and I wait for you to catch up. And it's easier for me to see this part of you because I'm on the outside. Right. So in a sense, right, I am a sort of healer, trickster, or whatever. And in my example, thankfully, I'm not physically blind, right? But I do have a kind of blindness in the regular world. I have, as my friends will tell you, as my kids will tell you, I have no sense of direction, right? If it weren't for GPS on my phone, I would never get anywhere. When I'm on my long walks in the neighborhood, chewing on a problem, thinking something through, I'll like, walk into trees, I'll like wander into the road because my vision is focused elsewhere, right? It's not focused in the sort of this world right here. And so I guess what I'm saying here is that there's a part of you that is like this. Okay. However buried or pushed back it may be, there's a part of you that is like this. The thing about me that's different is not that I have this and you don't. The thing about me that's different is that this part of me is like, through some accident of the tectonics of my life, right, is pushed forward and more exposed to the surface. Okay. But you have this in you as well. And again, I'm just telling you what I see. I see this in everyone I work with, right? They all have this power within them. And so the most interesting question to me is not what guru or expert to consult. Right? It's still an interesting question, but not to me the most interesting. The most interesting thing to me is to, in this exercise, hold in your mind this crone who has this special vision and ability to hold space for what she sees. Number one. And then number two, to regard her as she actually sees a part of your inner self. Okay. And try to see what she sees in you. To put it another way, this part of you that sees something in you that the skeptic in you is, oh, that's better than me. That's not the real me. But just to hold space for this alternate perspective for a second. There's a crone part of you that sees something in you that if you were to take it out and hold it in front of you, you would say, no, that's not me. That's too good for me. I'm not a man. I'm a coyote. And being a coyote is what I deserve. Right? Where you say, I'm not a painter. I'm not an artist. I'm not a healer. I'm just a regular whatever, so-and-so. Right? But to see and regard this thing that you are apparently not, because it's too good for you, to go to the inner crone within you and to ask her, what is this thing? What do you see? All right? What do you see that is perhaps worlds better than I actually think I am? And she will say perhaps that Well, if you really want to know, you're this. And the exercise is to ask her what this is, and then when she tells you, to try to not run away for 10 seconds and hold space for this part of you as she holds space for this part of you. Okay. And then the next level is that even if I, agree, I'm a horrible villain, right? I don't deserve it. She still, this part of you, regards you as a man, as this higher thing. Okay. She's not giving you a pass, right? She's not saying, "Oh, you don't deserve this, you dumb slob." But I'm, what day is it? Thursday. I'm going to make a special deal for you, and I will make you better anyway. That's not what she's doing. She is saying, "I see you as this now, without any need for adjustment, other than perhaps, to the extent that you're still resistant, to agree with me, to see what I see." Okay. What she sees in you is not what you will be in the future. What she sees in you is what you are now. Maybe not in the eyes of the village, but in your deep core, you are what you are. Okay. So we all have this part of us within us, and we are told by the village to fear her and avoid her. Do not meet her gaze. Do not be infected by her vision. We wouldn't want you to be too grandiose. We wouldn't want you to get too big for your britches. What is that Northern European, like the tall poppy is the one that gets cut, right? Something like that. And my point in this exercise is that whether you acknowledge her or not, she is there within you. And the exercise is to go in and talk to her and ask her, what does she see? And to try not to run away. Now, eventually you will run away because it will be too terrifying. You will run away for 3 days. Then you'll come back if you dare. Ask her again, and she'll tell you the same thing again. And you'll run away again for 3 days. That's circumambulation, right? Because it will be terrifying and you will run away, and that's okay. And that's okay. Okay. So that's the exercise. And now I'll go ahead and close the session. So our next session is next Sunday. It's free, open to the public. Please feel free to invite others if you like. No pressure. And I will put that in the chat on here and in Facebook. Okay. And I'll go ahead and close the session. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day. Have a great week. And I will see you all in the next session. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.